Well, we've already an approaching. Okay, yalla. Erhama Al-Kaabi, who is the Chief Employee Development and Welfare Officer at RasGas, which, as most people are aware, got exposed to a rather significant cyber, what did you call it, disruption in 2012, alongside Saudi Aramco, the world's biggest energy company. I'd also like to invite up Ms. Anna Girdner, ICS Security Engineering Advisor, Projects and Facility Engineering Division at Qatargas, who has recently arrived in the country and is a secondee from ExxonMobil with Qatargas and is helping to upgrade Qatargas' cyber posture. I'd like to invite Dr. Marc Dacier, Principal Scientist, Cybersecurity, Qatar Computing Research Institute, to please also take a seat. The QCRI is the institute that is tasked by the government to build up the R&D capacity for cyber in the country, and has a big responsibility. And last but not least, Mr. Mohammed Zumla, a cybersecurity strategy expert who has worked for a long time in the Qatar energy industry and is well known to many and will be continuing to do so in a new role. So I'd like to start by bring the Undersecretary in on the question of legislation, and to maybe if you could just give a quick overview of what the upcoming law that will be introduced, and in particular what parts of it is something that the energy industry should be taking note of.
The ministry has been speaking about this critical information infrastructure protection law for the past, and I think Mr. Zumla is probably fed up by this. The law is in its final stage, okay, and it will again improve the safeguards of the energy and the finance sector. That's the objective of issuing this law. Now, when I say the final stage, we have lots of review process for any legislative instrument. And it's not only in Qatar, it's everywhere. Even in the Western Hemisphere, laws sometimes start like a bill, and probably the bill doesn't actually succeed. So in Doha, the project started in late 2011, and now we're in 2015. Hopefully, by the end of this year, we will see the final instrument issued by the state, which will again affect the energy and the finance sector, or let's say the critical information infrastructure sector.
Is there a level of frustration in your voice that this is not happening soon enough? That something this important needs to be...
I'm a government employee, I cannot say frustration.
Okay.
It's not frustration, it's because, most of the work we do in the ministry is always in collaboration, with the sector. So we basically established a platform where the sector can voice their opinion. The reason I said Zumla, because Mr. Zumla and colleagues like Mr. Zumla, they were very active, in reviewing and also shaping up the final instrument. So when they attend those sessions and meeting with us, we sense the frustration in them, because for them, if the law is passed, there will be lots of changes in the organization, changes to the better. So it's not a frustration, it's just basically, we are pushing, we're doing our best to finalize, but, the ministry is not like the last decision maker. We have lots of legal experts who are looking on the legal framework to make sure the law is compatible, with international best practices in a legal manner.
Okay. Mr. Zumla, he may be putting words in your mouth. What is your experience? What is your outlook for this new law? I know you're no longer at Qatar Petroleum, but the Undersecretary was indicating levels of frustration. Maybe you can articulate where you see things at the moment and where the law needs to take it.
Sure. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum to everybody here. I'd just like to begin with firstly thanking Gulf Intelligence for welcoming me to this great platform with distinguished people here. Just to continue in terms of what Mr. Khalid has been talking about, essentially this law will really put a cornerstone for the state of Qatar. Yes, we have been working very closely with Ministry to try and develop this and make it more applicable for the state and organizations. It's really very, very important because unfortunately the senior executives in terms of the top organizations here tend to have a short memory, especially since incidents take place. There's a massive hype and excitement, and then there's a bit of a slump. So this law itself actually comes as a massive stick, if you will, to trying to drive focus and attention for this. And it's not such that the law is just pretty much going to be a tick box exercise. It's not something which is going to be pretty much stale after 3 to 5 years after it's been kind of promulgated. It's something which is going to be more long lasting. It will have a continuous improvement which is associated with this. So this is really the main emphasis for the critical organizations to really stand to attention and start getting the corner pieces in place.
Sean,
Sorry.
Okay, on my mic. Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, you're on, yeah.
All right. So,
Please.
to this point, we started working with ictQATAR on the National ICS Security Standards in 2013. And what we've done is we've scoured every single line of that law to make sure that we are capable of meeting the standards.
And are you?
Well, some of the, we have identified...
Is the law realistic in terms of the target of expectation?
Right. I think that the law was written from the perspective that they would like to provide a better way to defend and protect our environment. Right? The challenge that we have with the law is that once we started going through each one of these requirements, we tested it against technical feasibility, and we also tested it against practicality. And I think this is where we encountered a stumbling point. I'll give you one example. A 3-factor authentication, for example, is a really good idea for the nuclear industry. For an R&D, oil and gas, we have some limitations. So we started working with the government to find that balance between technical feasibility, practicality, and what are the boundaries of security and protection that we really need to meet as a minimum. So we have identified about 30 of these requirements, and I'm really glad to say that this collaboration between ictQATAR and our organization worked well because we've given them the perspective that these are the challenges from our end.
Well, let me just bring in Mr. Al-Kaabi, because RasGas had a cyber disruption now 3 years ago, and there's lessons learned from that, one would presume. Are we seeing those lessons be filtering into this law, and is it taking too long? Because this is an immediate challenge. There's a statistic that says last year in 2014, cybersecurity attacks globally rose 66% to 42.8 million, and that the energy sector in the United States, at least statistically, is 40% of the cyber attack targets. So this is an immediate, imminent challenge that there isn't time really for waiting too much longer for a new law, is there?
Well, Assalamu alaikum. I hope my voice is clear.
Yep.
Well, thanks for the question and for the opportunity. I think, in my view, the government does have a responsibility to set the minimum standard required to protect. I think there is a bigger responsibility in each company and in each entity to also protect their assets and their information. So I would not wait for the law to come for me to ensure I am protected, at least as much as can be.
How ready were you in 2012?
I don't think we were ready. I don't think anybody else was ready I think when we checked at the time, we were doing everything that everybody else was doing. It just, I think it was unlucky, and there was a vulnerability that was exploited and it was taken advantage of. But I can assure you that existed everywhere else. I think it's just where they spend the time.
You're lucky in a way that the experience you had, although very disruptive, was not to a scale that was affecting facilities, and so a wake-up call perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is. It's a huge learning. It did disrupt us, I think, on the business application side, but quickly we were able to come back with alternative solution that could, at least as far as selling our product, collecting our revenue, and I think going normal with business, that was accomplished very, very quickly. I think that the big lesson for me, at least from, actually to just spend a little bit of time, my perspective actually I did conduct the investigation. So I probably spent 6 months investigation on this incident. So I came with an old IT background, so that's why I was an independent to conduct this. And I think what strategy that Khalid talked about earlier does touch on every element of where I think each entity should be focusing.
So the industry shouldn't be waiting for this law?
I don't think anybody is waiting for the law to ensure they are protecting their asset and their information. I think they'll be making a big mistake if they're waiting.
But if you are going to be spending X millions of dollars and you don't know what the standard of expectation is going to be with the law, like you then may be out of alignment. You shoot your budget and then the law comes out and you're not on the target.
I think this is one of the hard lessons, and I don't want to, I think the hard lesson that I don't think hackers are smarter than us. I think they are by far more efficient. They are probably 100 times efficient than us. And I think anybody will go through this red tape would be, I think, exposed. If you're waiting for laws to come to help you, to tell you what to do, you should do. And you go and pick up any security standard, it will be matching 95% or 90% of what the law would come and tell you to do. So.
In terms of, there was recently in the United States, President Obama issued an executive order to urge companies to share cybersecurity threat information with one another and the federal government, what they described as central clearinghouses. Have you shared your lessons learned?
Definitely.
Do you think sharing, we mentioned earlier, Alistair mentioned it.
Yeah, I think we approach this I think definitely ICT was engaged day one. I think we did not wait for all the investigation to complete to share the information, because there was even exposure for others if we waited. So immediately we have shared as much as we could at the time across the oil and gas and with the government entity at the time. So I think we have shared as much as we could and as efficient as we can as well.
You wanted to jump in on the second?
Yeah, as you know, we're talking about the disruption, and we need to always focus on the measures to contain the disruption. You know, the laws or the technology will not stop the disruption. It's how efficient you are to contain this disruption. In my modest view, you know, our colleagues in RasGas were very efficient in containing the disruption, you know, and we should really commend them on this. Number two, you know, exchange platforms exist in Doha. RasGas, they shared, their lesson learned from this to the sector as well as cross-sector. So we have something called the IREX, which is Information Risk Expert Committee. It's very successful. It's been established since 2011, and we have, in all the meetings, it's always full house. We have 35 to 40 IT and risk managers participating in those sessions. So we were ahead of Mr. Obama. Just kidding.
Ahead of Mr. Obama.
If I can just also jump in.
I just want to bring in, I'll come back to you in 1 second. I just want to bring in Dr. Marc from the QCRI to get the view from the Research Institute, which does have a window on the scale of the increase of this challenge and has a critical role to play in meeting the challenge. I wonder, how are you progressing and how is industry performing in meeting the expectation?
So in terms of research, we definitely have a lot of work to do because, as it has been said, bad guys are pretty efficient. Things are keeping moving again and again, quickly. Every day we hear new issues being brought up. I just want to come back to something you just said before. You said, if you start investing your money and then the law says something else, you have missed your target. I think at the end of the day, when we look at the big picture is to protect the environment, not necessarily to be only compliant. If you have invested wisely in protecting your system, you are on target, and hopefully the law hasn't missed the target. And because at the end of the day, what we want a system where people understand and make the right choices. Because, as had been said earlier today, the key thing is a balanced regulation and education. Because in security, what we see when we look at technical issues, what we see is in many cases, the real problem is the user. The end user is the real problem. Because in theory, you can do a system without any vulnerability, in theory. And in theory and practice are the same thing. But in practice, they aren't. Because you have this guy there who wants to do this, who wants to use this system, who has invested so much in that and doesn't want to get rid of it just because you come to him and say, hey, there is a bug, you have to shut down your plant. He doesn't want that. He has a work to do, right? So we need to find ways to educate the people, to let them understand what the problems really are, because we don't want them to be our enemies. The users, if you tell them you are not allowed to do that... Users
being individuals at each desk?
At any level.
Okay.
Your kids at home, the regulator of a plant, anybody, right? If you tell him you're not allowed to do that, but he has to do it, he will find a way to circumvent whatever protection you have done, and it's going to be your worst enemies. So we have to let people understand why we do things. We have to educate them. It's very important at every level. And we also have, us collectively, technical and industrial and researchers, we also have to have a good understanding of what the real threats are, so that we do not spend, as you said earlier, the money on the wrong target. And there, sharing is very, very important. And I think here in Qatar we have a unique chance, because it's a rather small environment. People trust each other, they can talk together, and we can I think, do a much better job in sharing, not informally, but more systematically, information about threats we observe and how we can actually defend against them.
Well, that's the key point, isn't it? Systematically sharing, where it's an obligation and not a personal choice. I'd just like to open up for anybody who'd like to join the conversation. Please put up your hand. There's microphones, and please join or ask the question, make a comment. There's a gentleman in the front here, if we could bring a microphone. But just on that point, you wanted to jump in. I'd like to give you that opportunity. But about the waiting for people to share part rather than it being an obligation.
So yes, there's an excellent instrument from the Ministry of ictQATAR, which is the IREC, which is what Mr. Khalid was talking about. This is the Information Risk Experts Committee. Now, unfortunately, there's not so much a tendency for organizations to really air the issues or really let the skeletons out of the closet. So perhaps trying to tell the regulator that they've got major issues is perhaps a bit of a problem for organizations. It was for this reason that under Dr. Asada, the Minister for Energy, we established the Cybersecurity Partnership Forum across the entire sector, which had 32 organizations, including the IOCs. And here, this is really the opportunity for organizations to start discussing major incidents, lessons learned, and try to share and establish common strategies. And yes, there was definitely a kind of a learning cycle. So organizations didn't really want to kind of still share because essentially this was under the umbrella of Dr. Al-Sada. So we established what was like the Chatham House rules to say essentially what's discussed there stays there, and you can reuse it as long as you don't mention the organization. And there was also the opportunity for my previous organization to start airing their issues first, and then for other organizations to say, well, if the biggest entities also have these issues, let's talk about our issues as well.
Sorry, the gentleman in the second row, if you just introduce yourself, please.
My name is Ahmed Al-Mugarmed. The two things that I worry about the most, security and privacy. Believe it or not traffic in Doha, not retirement. These are the things that worry me the most. And I would like to see what is being done to alleviate the concerns of the private citizens. I feel as a private citizen, I'm getting it both ways. I'm getting it from the criminals that are attacking my records every time I send an email, every time I open an attachment, every time I receive an email from somebody I don't know, I worry. Seriously, I do. And so that's from one aspect. Then the government, I have some concerns about privacy, because as governments try to protect systems, they would like to push privacy aside. So, I mean, these are the things that worry us.
Do you think that as the head of QCRI, the Qatar Computer Research Institute, and an active participant in this debate, that the new law should compel companies and government agencies and all players to report a cyber disruption? At the moment, 9 out of 10 cyber disruptions are never reported due to, for whatever multitude of reasons people choose not to do so. That the law should have these sorts of mandates while protecting privacy, as you say.
No, I mean, I'd leave this to the experts, but I think laws,
Take a stab at
laws are, should be gentle and have a light touch. I think too many laws could hinder a lot of things that we try to do.
But you take the argument as expressed by the Undersecretary, as expressed very recently by the most senior person in the US government, President Obama, that sharing and the communal responsibility is critical. Without it, there's no defense.
The number one obstacle is sharing of information under some agreement between all the entities, because the criminals are sharing information openly, and the law-abiding people and the responsible people who are being attacked are not sharing the information because competitive reasons and so on and so forth. And we don't.
That's why it has to be mandated.
Yeah, you don't want company X to announce that they've been attacked because that could have a negative impact on their stock value or shareholders' confidence and so on and so forth.
So
I don't want to
jump in, yeah?
Yeah, if I may jump. So here we keep talking about laws and mandates to share lessons learned from incidents. Once we have reached that point, it's too late. We have lost already. We should really focus on making sure we never reach that stage.
But clearly this, like many things, is a top-down
But
need.
I mean,
this is not voluntary. Yes. If it was, we'd be...
But again, I think in sharing is extremely valuable, very important. I think we should also share knowledge we have about our domain, because cybersecurity is interdisciplinary, right? And I think, for me as a researcher, I think the number one quality of a researcher is somebody who can say, I don't know, right? I think it's a necessary, it's not enough, right? It's not a sufficient condition, because, many people can say, I don't know, but it's a necessary condition, in particular for cybersecurity, because you are a good researcher if you dare to ask, but I don't know your stuff, I don't know how it works, but what if the bad guy does that, right? And typically the person will tell you, who is an expert in his own domain, like, liquefaction of gas or whatever, it says, no, but this will not happen, right? I've had numerous conversations with people like that, experts in their domain. I ask, what if this happens? And it says, oh, shoot me.
Shoot me. Was there another word you were reaching for there?
Well, yeah, maybe, I don't know. But you see what I mean? It's
yes.
and I think here, in Qatar, I think we should really do that. Very honestly, I dare to say, I don't know that much about ICS and SCADA, even though I have worked for a couple of years with Siemens, people who have worked on Stuxnet and these kinds of things. But I cannot say I really understand the constraints that people are facing when they try to secure ICS and SCADA. I think I know a lot about security and what happens in the IT world and so on, but when we move into the OT world, operational technologies, it's a different story. And I think we should really push there the momentum to make sure that the sharing of information takes place there, that we can really work together. It has been said, you know, duplication is not a good thing. We should not, for instance, we should not, in cybersecurity, build a fake power plant just to see how it works and play attacks against there. But if there are people who have such big facilities to test interoperability and stuff like that, working hand in hand with them to see how attacks are possible there would be very interesting. And I think this is something we can do in Qatar that we cannot do anywhere else in the world. And this is something that could bring into Qatar very good researchers who cannot do that anywhere else in the world.
Let's bring in the audience with the voting and bring up a survey question and some clickers to the panelists, please. But you just want to jump in to go ahead?
Yeah. You know, the criminals or the hackers, the black hackers, they're exchanging information about tools how to improve their hacks. Okay? The platform to exchange information among white hacks is to improve tools how to prevent the hacks. This is what we're trying to do. And you don't need a law for that. It's happening. It's happening in our society. You go to a majlis in Doha and you will see 3 or 4 IT directors. They will speak about job-related challenges. It's happening in public domain. You go online and you see people tweeting about this. You know, so what we did, or what we are doing, is we're trying to encourage this kind of communication, you know, in a forum where people will benefit. You know, this is what we're doing. You don't need a law for that.
You don't need a law, but you do need leadership. I just quote the General Keith Alexander. I was at a lecture by him last week in Houston, who's the former chief of the NSA, the National Security Agency in the US. And he said that we are not, basically he said that we face mounting risks of a systemic cyber assault, with the greatest risk being a catastrophic attack on the energy infrastructure, and of which we are not prepared for. Even in the US, the most advanced economy, the most advanced resource, not ready for. Without leadership.
I agree with that. But see, when we draft those instruments, okay, we need to also consider the fabric of the society. You know, so I cannot have, you know, something that works in the US will apply in Doha to work efficiently. You know, that's why, you know, we have these forums to customize those tools or instruments. You know, so I agree. Yes, the US, they have major challenges when it comes to securing their national energy sector because of legacy systems. They still have nuclear plants running on technology for the past 30 years. And it's very costly for them to improve. Doha, and I agree with the doctor, it's different.
Well, maybe they should resist, as maybe others, which we'll get to as a question, resist connecting to the internet before you deal with your legacy hardware, rather than exposing further before your defenses are greater. But let's just go to the question, cyber attacks present the greatest threat to the world's energy infrastructure today because not enough resources are being deployed fast enough to bolster defenses. 10 seconds, please. Agree, click A. Don't agree, click B. Are being deployed fast enough to bolster defenses. And the resources are multiple different things. Obviously, their budgets, their laws, their government's upgrading. So there we have a fairly split view. Well, 52%, or 48 saying that one would say are being happening fast enough. But I'd just like to give the gentleman in the front row a chance to come in and please introduce yourself.
The voice is not clear.
Hi there, it's Simon Goldsmith from BAE Systems.